Dr. Joel, tell us about the relationship dynamics between two people who are complete strangers, but then put into an arranged marriage.
Yeah, it's not easy. I think if we are lucky, then you have that sparks fly moment. I see the person across the room and we fall madly in love, and that can happen sometimes, like
in an arranged marriage.
Well, sometimes, yeah. I mean, it's not any different from you meeting someone in a party, for example, in class or things like that, right? Albeit there is that added weight or burden of it being an arranged marriage, but sometimes there can be pretty good chemistry and then things can work out well, right? But there are also instances where it's a bit more negative, right? So that means there's a lot of apprehension built to it, a lot of baggage, and there's this concern or this animosity towards the fact that I'm being forced into a marriage. And I think the third possible option is that it's just like, let's see what happens, right? I think oftentimes with these arranged marriages, it's not an unknown quantity in the sense that people already know about it. It's a possibility, it can happen and it might happen, right? So I think sometimes it's not like it's a total surprise. I think there are instances where total surprises, I've heard of stories like that before, right? But when it's not, then people are perhaps, they'll take a wait and see kind of approach, who this person is, can I jive with this person and see whether we could get along, and then from there we can decide and see.
But I think there's a difference between being forced into marriage and having a marriage that's arranged, right?
Yeah, yep, correct.
The force is like you have no other option. Arranged is like, let's see whether these two people get along, right?
I think there are variations to that, as to the extent of my knowledge, and I could be entirely wrong as well. I know of people who have been in situations where, hey, this is a good partner for you. Why don't you guys try and see whether you guys hit it off or not, right? But there's also instances where I think that it's more of a obligation, right? This has been arranged because of, I don't know, maybe perhaps status or good fit or whatever it is, right? And there really isn't a choice to be made. It's a when is the date kind of thing, right?
Right,
so
right.
I think there are some variabilities there.
Right.
I mean, anthropologically speaking, the idea of arranged marriages, it provides a certain amount of things like, be it wealth, land, a future, a kingdom, right?
Yeah.
And
yeah, that's right.
Is that still sort of something that they?
You mean the merging of the kingdoms and empires and stuff like this?
Right. So
Right.
so the proliferation of your tribe or clan, right? Is that still very much part of what you see existing in arranged marriages today as well?
I think that can happen. I mean, I've heard of cases before where it's done because the family's trying to ensure or trying to merge like business empires, for example, and things like that. So I don't think it's outside the realm of normality for that to happen, right? I think another good reason why that happens also is because I think some families would like their offspring to marry back into their same the
culture
cliques. In Chinese you've got that different what do you call it? Like you got a Han, you got a Cantonese, you got clans. Yeah, clans. Thank you. Sorry, my bad. And things like that, right? So sometimes they prefer that. They want the continuity of that line or the purity of that line, so to speak, right? And I think that's also another good reason why people get married. Other cultures where they impose a caste system, for example, that could be another consideration as well to ensure that they are in marrying into similar or a higher caste to bring the family up, so to speak, right?
Okay, so going back to the actual marriage itself, what are some of the issues that you've seen that a couple faces, especially in sort of the initial stages of their marriage, like the first month, 2 months, 6 months?
I think by and large, broadly speaking, there are two possible reactions. One is the more expected one, where it's a lot of fear, trepidation, anxiety about the whole situation. Can I get along with this person? I don't know who this person is, And if let's say it's their first romantic relationship romantic relationship, right? Can they get along romantically, right? Is it something that they are okay with, for example, getting married is one thing, then there's also the other element after that of having kids, starting a family, and it's quite awkward and weird potentially, like if it's someone that's brand new, you never met in your life before, right? That can obviously change over time. I think over time that's the feelings can develop and they can become quite a good couple family unit after that, and you have heard of many cases where this has been successful in that sense, right?
Again, it goes back to the spark thing that you were saying earlier.
Yeah. That's the second thing I was going to say, though. The less common or the more atypical reaction would be that sparks fly immediately. They go into this honeymoon phase, everything's great. Both the couple is happily engaged and together, and they get into it. But as we all know, like, sometimes when we get in relationships after the initial honeymoon period, there can be a massive crash after that, right?
Because you're on a high, and after that you go.
It's called reality bites.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
the
exactly,
crash,
exactly. Yeah. So that could possibly happen as well, and I also heard of cases where, after the marriage has happened, they move in together and they realize, the guy doesn't unroll his underwear, or the girl doesn't really cook very well, or whatever it is, right? That can happen in a family unit, and that can be a big reality check in that sense, right? And the honeymoon period ends, and then it can be quite detrimental after the fact as well. So two sides of the coin here in that sense.
Right.
So I suppose the idea of trust is at the basis of any kind of relationship, right? How can you trust a spouse who you barely know?
The cynical me would say, how can you trust a spouse you know as well, right?
Yeah.
Right.
But I think with that in mind, the reason I share that is because I think trust is something where you have to have a lot of faith in, right? You got to say, okay, I trust this person, right? And until we have evidence for or against, it's something that we have to go on by just sheer belief, sheer faith, right? That we can trust this person, right? Obviously, with someone that you don't know, it takes a bit longer to develop. It takes a while for you to say, okay, maybe I'll start small, like things like, oh, can you go buy the milk, or can you go change the taps, or whatever it is, right? And then start from those small little nuggets, and then work your way up, right? But again, even with people you've known your entire life, right? The trust that you develop between, let's say, friends, for example, and then they get married after that is very, very different, right? I trust my friend to I don't know, send me to work, for example. It's not the same as I trust my spouse to have kids with me, right? Or to start a family with me. It's very different kind of levels of trust.
But generally, it's a horrible comparison, but innocent until proven guilty, that this person can actually do all the things that you're hoping will tick all the boxes of good husband or good wife or good spouse or whatever, right?
Yeah. I think it's one of those like glass half full or empty kind of things.
Right,
you can come at it from that direction, or there are also people who say that I don't trust you until you give me reasons to trust you, that kind of thing, right? So I think it really depends on you as a person, how you're wired, in that sense, right? And
I suppose also the sort of one of the sort of things one could hold, consciously in our mind is that if you're feeling like that, they're going to be feeling like that too. And so, like, modeling that kind of behavior that's trustworthy is probably what they need to see in order for them to sort of step up as well, right?
Okay.
And the hard part is that when it's two unknowns, right, it's really just throw the dice and see what happens kind of thing, right?
Yeah, let's see what happens.
Exactly.
I reckon a lot of couples do that anyway, even if they think they know each other.
Yeah.
Okay, so for couples that are unable to connect with each other, what happens to their mental psyche knowing or feeling trapped in their marriage?
That's a really good question, right? I think that trapped feeling, I think we all of our feelings, we all of our perceptions, it can change, right? And I'll caveat this really strongly by saying it can. There's a possibility of change happening. I'm not saying it will, but there is a possibility, right? And the reason why I say it like that is because there has been instances where couples are together not so much out of love sometimes, but it's a sense of responsibility, obligation, commitment to one another, and things like that, right? Even if you exclude the fact that it's an arranged marriage, there's some romantic relationships that start off romantically, all the honeymoon period and bluster and all that. They eventually evolve in a relationship where it's a very functional one, right? We're together because I committed to you, I still love you, but it's a different kind of love, for example, and all that.
Or because of the kids.
Or the kids, or work, for example. Whatever.
Generally, you can always tell, because I've heard my friends say, "Oh yeah, that's my housemate." I'm like, no, that's your wife. Right? Yeah.
That's the mother of my kids,
Exactly.
Right. And the same goes to arranged marriages as well. And I think sometimes when you start off in that kind of a footing where, let's say, for example, hypothetically, they're not romantically inclined and they're not interested in one another, but because of a sense of obligation to one another, a commitment to one another, and also to family as well, I think that's a big component in any marriage, arranged or otherwise, that when you marry someone, it's not just that individual person, it's the families, all the baggages that come along with it, right? And I think if you go into it with the ability to say, okay, I'm committed to you and your family, I think it can work out. It is possible. It's not a guarantee, of course, but it's definitely a helping factor there.
Because when you marry someone, you don't just marry that person, you marry the whole family.
Yeah.
in a way, right?
Yes, and I've sort of seen many marriages be tested because of the family, not
Right, right.
necessarily because
Yeah.
of the two
Yeah,
people
yeah.
in it, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So
right.
I guess how can parents or family play an important role in supporting their child, their adult child, right? When the relationship goes south, especially if they are the ones who were the organizers of the marriage.
They're the
in
ones
the
that put
first
them
place.
together,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
I think that's always really, really hard. I mean, okay, I'm making a broad sweeping assumption here. I think when parents arrange for a marriage for their kids, it's born out of the best of interest, right?
Yes.
We're not out to like kantoy our kids or get them in trouble or anything like
Yeah.
that. We want the best for them, right?
Yeah.
And I think as the famous saying goes, the road hell paved in good intentions, right?
Yes.
Sometimes the best of intentions can turn out alright. This is something that happens. This is part of life in that sense. And I think if it were to get to that point, I think the best thing a parent can do is to support them as much as you can, of course, provide them with as much resources as we are able to provide to ensure that it can work out. I think we should always err to the side of that sideline in that sense, right? Get them the help that they need. If they need to, send them for couples therapy if they can, if they're up for it, providing them with a safe space if they need a place to get out there for a couple of days, for example, and things like that. But eventually, if we hit a point or hit a wall where we know that it cannot be fixed, right? It cannot be repaired. Then that's the next support that we give them. How do we then help them get out of it? If possible, right? I know there are some religions where this is not is frowned upon, it's not allowed to. Then we have to find some other ways of helping them in that sense, right? But I think it changes over time about how the kind of help that we can provide the couple.
Because I think the parent's role ultimately is your responsibility to your own child.
Yeah.
If that child is not happy in a relationship, you should help your child in whatever way possible, right?
Yes. I mean, in a lot of circumstances that I've seen, it's like, well, it's your marriage, sink or swim. It's sort of like, I've done it. I've washed my hands of that now. I've got nothing to do
You're
with
an
it.
adult now, deal with your own problems, right?
Yeah.
Right. So for someone coerced into marriage, forced into marriage by their family, who then develops feelings of love, is that more akin to like Stockholm Syndrome, or a different kind of love that would have evolved had it be,
Yeah. Okay, I don't know about Stockholm Syndrome. I mean, with Stockholm Syndrome, there has to be a significant amount of trauma involved, right? Like, traditionally with the Stockholm Syndrome, it's because you are held hostage against your will in a potentially harmful situation, be it kidnap or hostage or whatever it is.
Which is a lot of arranged marriages, unfortunately.
In some,
right?
That's true. So, but again, with the Stockholm Syndrome, there's an element of time as well. It's the intensity of time as well, right? I think with marriages, my inclination, or at least from now on, I have to be fair, personally, I've not met anyone who is and has been arranged marriage and has been diagnosed with Stockholm Syndrome. I've not met someone like that, so I don't know for a fact, right? But I think given the duration, the length of time and all that kind of things, I think it's less likely to be Stockholm Syndrome, right? I think when arranged marriage starts off on a bad foot and it evolves into something that's quite functional and quite positive, right? I think it's a genuine reflection of the transformation in the relationship, right? From something where, it's all about honeymoon, bluster, emotional fireworks and things like that, to something that, hey, I've got a great partner who is a fantastic person to have by my side. They support me, they support the kids, we're doing great. That could be an evolution of how they see love, right? And then that can be a very positive thing for them in that regard, right? So I don't think it's necessary where they are not so much forced to, but I have no other choice but to love this person. I don't think so all the time. Sometimes it can be, don't get me wrong. But there are also instances where, it's a genuine appreciation that I've got something that's pretty good going on here and something that I can run with.
I suppose it fits into the idea of this is family now, because for a lot of people, their priority is not that prince in shining armor or whatever. It's actually family, security, house, children, right? So it ticks all the boxes. So JD sort of pulled up some stats which basically talk about the fact that there's only sort of 1% of divorce in India with arranged marriages. I think in America it's around 50% of
out of love marriages, I think it's 40 or 50% divorce.
Right, but out of arranged marriages, I think it was 4% divorce. These numbers on the surface look good. However, what I'm curious about is why there aren't more divorces.
I think, again, I don't have the research to back me up here, but anecdotally speaking, I think one big factor here is the presence of family and the desire of the family or the choices made by the family, right? I think if someone were to say yes to an arranged marriage, that would suggest to me there is quite a strong adherence towards the family's wishes, the family origin, your parents and stuff like that, right? Their wishes, right? And I think when that is a factor, then when you go into a relationship, because I'm saying yes because of my sense of obligation to my parents and my culture and community, then that carries through to the marriage as well. That means there's a less likelihood or less possibility of them calling it off, put it that way. Because again, if I break up with this person, it's not just with this person, it's with the community, with the culture, with the society, and all that kind of things, right? As opposed to more romantic relationships when people just start off and romantically and things like that, right? Because it's that promise or that dedication is primarily to that one person. I mean, family is involved as well, but it's not that strong a factor as compared to the arranged marriage ones. Then I think if it really is bad chemistry, if it really is a bad fit, then it's easy for two people to call it off versus two communities to call it off, or two members of a big community in that sense. That would be my initial anecdotal response to that question, I think. But again, like I said, I don't have any research to back it up.
But there's also a lot of shame involved in some cultures, right? If you divorce.
Yeah,
for the family, right? Oh my God, I can't believe
I think you're right. It's just it's the weight of what it means. Like if it's you're in a, and I'm putting aside the extreme relationships, which are really nasty, but the ones that just aren't working.
Yeah.
And they're at each other's throats, metaphorically speaking. It's a lot of pressure, isn't it?
Yeah.
To be a couple who cannot separate because it's a separation of communities and families.
Yeah. And I'll probably throw another thing in the hat as well. I think that's also made worse if, let's say, for example, both or either one of them has a romantic partner outside, right? That means prior to the arranged marriage, they have someone they're in love with and they want to live their lives with, and they had to say yes to the arranged marriage because of that. So yeah, I think definitely you're right, Asha. I think it's just that it's hard, right? It's definitely very hard, right? It's not impossible, but it's hard.
Let's touch on sort of the multiple levels of trauma that exist in the idea of a forced arranged marriage. What are we looking at basically when you got, not as JD said, arranged marriage, but in a forced arranged marriage?
That means there's no way out.
I think the most accessible one would be the sense of that relationship with the family of origin. I think that's definitely the first level that we're talking about here, right? Because they are the ones who brought us up, taken care of us, nurtured us, cared for us, and stuff like that, right? And now they're making us, forcing them into a very impossible decision, right? There is no decision to be made. You are getting the relationship, and that sense of loss of trust, loss of what do you put it? Betrayal, yeah, I think that's a good one as well. So by the family members, right? So from people who love me and nurture me to saying that I have no choice, I have to go into this marriage, it can be quite traumatic for a lot of people. That's the first one, I think. Second one is the whole idea of being with someone who is a stranger, right? I think, don't say a marriage. Again, to live with someone, sometimes you just want to, be by yourself and not have any close contact with the person, right? And now you're forced to spend presumably the rest of your lives with this person. Can be quite upsetting and traumatic. I think if they both turn out to be great people, really nice people, amicable people, then great, fine. I think then some more positive things can develop from there. But if let's say one of them is a bit more, it's different from what you want in a partner, for example. If you are super driven and that person the slacker, it can be a bad fit. And I think that can be very traumatic because your expectations, your goals, your dreams take a back seat to the relationship in that sense. So that's another traumatic point there. I think third one is also when both parties are against it. Sometimes one party can be quite into it, one party is not, and then that could sometimes be a bit more. I wouldn't say manageable, but at least there's someone there who's into it, right? So you can try and work something out. I think what makes it really, really bad is when there are two people who are at it, right? They don't want to be in a relationship. They're just fighting all the time. I think that's definitely another trauma point because there literally is no safe haven for you. You come back home and you know what's coming towards you, right? So I think off the bat, I think these are three traumatic points that someone can go through if they're forced into a marriage.
And in those cases, they can't even get divorced.
Well, they
Okay,
can.
so
Yep. Sorry, I should go.
no, if they get divorced, so like how do they handle the stigma of leaving the arranged marriage, having that divorce?
That's a really good question, though. And again, like I said, I don't in this regard, I don't have a personal experience with that, lah. But I would imagine that if you were to hit that point, like, where divorce is the option that you chose, right? Number one, I don't think it's a decision you come to lightly, because when you do that, you don't only divorce your partner, you divorce a lot of different factors here, right? Family members, society, culture, perhaps even religion, for example, and things like that, right? So when you come to the decision, it's not going to be an easy or light decision to be made, right? And I think when that happens, um, ideally, of course, the level of preparation to get you to that point would mean that you are quite robust against it, or against the negative effects of it. You're prepared to, let's say, for example, leave the community or leave the religion, or your family even, right? And I think for a lot of people that can be quite a relief potentially, because then it's almost like a burden's been lifted off your shoulders, right?
Right.
But at other times, when this person, for example, has been like really nurtured by the community, by the family, it can be very, very scary as well. Because then I'm saying that by doing this or by taking this action, I'm going to cut off all these resources I have. I'm going to be literally alone, right? Not only figuratively, but literally. And that can be quite daunting. But again, what's the worst scenario here? Is staying in a marriage worse, or is being alone but free from it better, in that sense? So it's a decision that needs to be made.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of makes me think of the impossible situation of, okay, if it's a really terrible situation, I understand, no matter whatever cost, you're better off out of it for your safety. But then there's also, being ostracized and in exile from your tribe. That's also sort of a certain death in itself of you. I mean, your psyche, your whole culture.
Yeah.
There's that to sort of, you're not just having to get over what you're leaving behind, but you're having to heal this complete disparity between where you once belonged to no man's land now.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I think that's also a reason why a lot of people do stay in marriages, right? Because it's just too big a loss to bear, in that sense.
Most arranged marriages end up well. What can we take away from those marriages? The principles, the values, the things that they do, and apply those to love marriages, to give love marriages a better chance.
I think from the people that I've met and people I've spoken to, I think the one thing that romantic relationships can take away from these arranged marriages is the fact that their psychological, emotional flexibility, right? I think Hollywood and TV and movies has indoctrinated in us this idea of romantic love, passionate love. Everything has to be fireworks. Every touch should be like electric and stuff like that. Which is nice, which is fun, right? But I think a lot of people don't see the movie 3 months after, right? In that sense, right? After the romantic has
so happily
gone,
ever after only lasts 3 months, is it?
Yeah,
correct, or however
3
long it
months
lasts, right? The Hollywood flop, right? 3 months after, where it's replaced, right, by commitment, by my responsibility to my partner, by the different kind of love, right? A more, instead of romantic kind of love, but more affectionate, more familiar kind of love, in that sense. I think that's what romantic couples can take away from arranged marriage couples, in that sense, because they are encouraged to, or strongly encouraged to, from the off, right, to engage in that kind of a relationship instead of a romantic fireworky kind of a relationship, in that sense, right? So being flexible enough to transition, right, appreciate and enjoy the all the fun and exciting times, of course, but after, when it's gone or it's moved away, out the way, then we can transition into that kind of that mode, in that sense. I think if we can do that, I think a lot of relationships can be saved, can be worked on, in that sense, right? So that's one, definitely. I think another one is also that sense of self. I think a lot of times when people get into early relationships at the start, it's a lot about what I want, what I find exciting, enticing, whatever it is, right? It's a very self-centered in that sense. But as any family person will know, after a while, that sense of self, I wouldn't say goes away, but changes, because then you have kids, then you've got family, you've got obligations, and weddings to go to, funerals to go to, and all that kind of stuff, right? That sense of what you want is still there, of course. I never vouch for anyone to say forget yourself, no, right?
Yeah.
But it's yourself and XYZ ABC, right?
Right.
And again, with a lot of arranged marriages, they are again very early on encouraged to embrace that kind of being in that sense, right? Because when I agree to this arranged marriage, it's not just for me, but it's for myself, my family, my community, and all that kind of things, right? So we can adopt that. That will also encourage a lot more healthier progressions of relationships like romantic couples.
So basically, I was just looking at arranged marriages from a wrong point of view. Then, arranged marriages, there's no way out of it. Like basically, really, if your friends say, "Hey, there's this really nice guy that we know. Maybe we can introduce you to."
Yeah.
Technically, that's also an arranged thing. Let's just say if you do end up getting married,
Absolutely.
isn't it technically arranged marriage as well?
Yeah, I think so. With much less obligation behind it, like, I suppose, right?
I get that, but I'm just saying, like,
it's like a spectrum of things, but actually, if you think about it,
it's somewhere in the middle, but you're
even
not
if you
forced.
believe in destiny, it's arranged.
Yeah,
If you think of
exactly.
it that way, right?
In a way, right? And also, these days, playing the field, you don't have time to play the field. Number two, you're stuck at home. Lockdown, you can't even go and play the field. And now you don't have anything uncertain. You know you're gonna get married. Isn't something certain also very good for your soul? Like, at least you know where you're heading in a way.
Yeah. I think you're right in that sense. Sometimes people do enjoy that fact that no choice needs to be made. It's like, for example, when it's dinner time and you ask your partner, "Hey, want to eat what? I don't know, you choose lah. I don't know, you choose lah." Right? And then no one makes the decision, right? As opposed to you having a bag full of KFC in the fridge and say, "Oh, let's just eat leftovers," for example, right? It's done lah, right? I think it's a matter of perspective lah.
Yes.
I think it really depends on how you go into that arranged marriage lah. If it's going into it with this sense of animosity, fear, anxiety, anger, even towards your family and towards your future partner, then it's gonna be difficult, right? Again, I'm not saying that there is a right or wrong way to all of this. It's not, right?
Yeah.
It's ultimately up to you how you want to get into it lah.
Dr. Joe, say that listening to you right now are parents of someone who's not really in a good place in their marriage, in their arranged marriage.
Okay.
Right. And the parents are dealing with sort of, perhaps they don't necessarily mind too much about divorce, but they understand the stigmas there in the community and stuff. What advice would you give these parents in terms of how to perhaps reframe what they're thinking so they can best or better support their child who's desperately unhappy and needs to get out?
That's a really good question, but really hard thing to do, right? And I said this on the show before. With the horse analogy, like, you can force them to the river, but you can't make them drink the water. You can share with them the best therapists, the best TED Talks, the best whatever, right? But ultimately, if your kid is unhappy and is unable to budge in terms of the way they see the relationship, the marriage, the arrangement, and all that, there's precious little that you can do. You've literally, not literally, but we've put them in a situation where they can't say no to the marriage. So you've sort of kind of, inverted commas, forced them into it, right?
Yeah.
But they get to choose whether they like it or not, right? They get to decide for themselves whether it's something that they're open to or prepared to undertake or not, right? And there's nothing we can do as parents about that. I think the best thing we can do as parents is to have everything ready and prepared. So in terms of resources, in terms of therapy, even whatever it is, so that whenever they're ready, they can reach out for it to try and enact that change. But ultimately, that's about what we can do, just to get it ready, have that ready, and then when they're ready, they come to you. And if they're not, then it's something we have to accept, unfortunately.
Support them. Don't let them sink or swim.
Yes, exactly.
Don't do that.
But also change. Not all arranged marriages are forced marriages. I think we just need to change that mindset.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to have that conversation with your friend where you've played the field, and then you say, "I don't want to get into an arranged marriage," and then after that, next thing you know, you're like, "Oh, when I'm 15, you're 50 already. We have no other options. We just get married to each other." People have that conversation all the time, right?
But I think it's like what JD said. I think it's also important to remember that, a lot of times, and this is human nature, right? Like, you go on any kind of Facebook forum about cars or iPhones or Samsung phones, whatever it is, right? More often than not, the only thing you hear about is the complaints, the negative parts, the broken bits, the things that you can gripe about. Very rarely do you say, "I love my car because of XYZ." No, it's because, this engine will fail at the X distance and all that kind of things, right? I think same goes for relationships as well. You know, when it's problematic, I think that's when there's a lot of tea to be spilled, put it that way,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
You
yeah.
know, as opposed
Yeah.
to a relationship that goes well. And we all know there are many relationships that
Mm.
do work out, right? So I think that's also something to remember as well.